The winter air in New York City was biting, sharp enough to cut through layers of clothing like a knife. Snowflakes swirled lazily from the gray sky, blanketing the streets and sidewalks in a thick layer of white. It was late evening, and most people had already retreated indoors, seeking warmth and comfort. But Emily Carter wasn't one of them. A 24-year-old graphic designer with dreams bigger than her tiny studio apartment, she trudged through the icy streets after another long day at work. Her breath came out in visible puffs as she wrapped her scarf tighter around her neck, trying to shield herself from the relentless cold. Emily lived for moments of creativity, spending hours sketching designs or brainstorming ideas for clients, who barely noticed her efforts. Life hadn't been easy for her. She worked hard, often juggling multiple freelance projects just to make ends meet. Yet, despite the challenges, she always found joy in small things: a warm cup of coffee on a chilly morning, the sound of laughter echoing down a busy street, or even the quiet beauty of freshly fallen snow. Tonight, though, there was no time to appreciate the serene winter scene. She was tired, hungry, and eager to get home. To save time, Emily decided to take a shortcut through a narrow alleyway tucked between two towering buildings. It wasn't the safest route, but it would shave 10 minutes off her commute. As she stepped into the shadowy passageway, the crunch of snow beneath her boots echoed eerily in the silence. The alley smelled faintly of dampness and decay, a stark contrast to the crisp, clean scent of the falling snow outside. Just as she reached the halfway point, something unusual caught her eye. A dark lump sprawled awkwardly against the wall. At first, Emily thought it might be a pile of discarded trash bags, or perhaps a forgotten piece of furniture. But as she drew closer, her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't an object, it was a person. A man, dressed in what appeared to be expensive clothes, lay motionless on the ground. His tailored coat looked out of place amidst the filth of the alley, its fabric now soaked and stained with melting snow. His face was pale, almost ghostly, and his body trembled violently from the cold. For a moment, Emily froze, unsure of what to do. Fear gripped her chest as her mind raced with questions. Was he drunk? Hurt? Dead? Should she call for help? Or should she keep walking and pretend she hadn't seen anything? The rational part of her brain whispered warnings about stranger danger, urging her to leave before trouble found her. But then she saw his lips move slightly, trembling as if trying to form words. He was alive, but barely. Without giving herself time to overthink, Emily knelt beside him. She placed 2 fingers on his neck, searching for a pulse. Relief washed over her when she felt a faint but steady beat beneath her fingertips. "Hey," she said softly, shaking his shoulder gently. "Can you hear me?" There was no response. His eyes remained closed, his breathing shallow and uneven. Emily's instincts kicked in. She couldn't just leave him here. He wouldn't survive much longer in this freezing weather. Summoning every ounce of courage, she glanced around the alley, hoping someone else might appear to help. But the street was deserted, the only sounds coming from the distant hum of traffic and the occasional gust of wind. It was up to her. With great effort, Emily managed to drag the man toward the edge of the alley, where an old awning offered some protection from the biting wind. Her muscles burned as she pulled him inch by inch, her gloves slipping on the slick surface of the snow. Once they were under the awning, she removed her coat and draped it over him, tucking it tightly around his shivering frame. She knew it wouldn't be enough to fully protect him from the cold, but it was better than nothing. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "Hello? Yes, I need an ambulance," she stammered, her voice trembling with urgency. "There's a man unconscious in an alley near 5th Avenue. Please hurry." The operator assured her that help was on the way, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. While waiting for the paramedics, she stayed by, the man's side, talking to him softly even though he didn't respond. "You're going to be okay," she murmured, more to reassure herself than him. "Help is coming." She studied his face, noticing how young he looked despite the weariness etched into his features. His dark hair was damp with melted snow, and his expensive watch glinted faintly in the dim light. Whoever he was, he clearly wasn't someone who belonged in a place like this. Finally, the distant wail of sirens broke through the stillness. Paramedics arrived quickly, their boots crunching through the snow as they rushed to assess the situation. They loaded the man onto a stretcher and prepared to transport him to the hospital. One of the medics turned to Emily. "Did you know him?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I just found him here." "Thank you for calling us," the medic said sincerely. "You probably saved his life." Emily nodded, though her mind was still reeling. What had happened to this man? Why was he alone in such a dangerous part of town? And why did she feel this strange sense of responsibility for someone she didn't even know? Despite her exhaustion, Emily insisted on accompanying the ambulance to the hospital. She wanted to ensure that the man received proper care. Sitting in the back of the vehicle, she watched as the medics worked tirelessly to stabilize him. Her thoughts drifted to the randomness of life, how a single decision, like choosing to walk through that alley, could alter the course of someone's existence. When they arrived at the emergency room, doctors whisked the man away, leaving Emily to wait anxiously in the sterile hallway. Eventually, a nurse approached her with an update. "He's stable now," the nurse explained, "but he's suffering from severe hypothermia. We'll need to monitor him closely." Relieved, Emily sank into a nearby chair, suddenly aware of how drained she felt. Her coat was gone, and the chill of the hospital seeped into her bones. Still, she couldn't bring herself to leave. Not yet. Something about this mysterious man intrigued her. Who was he? Why had fate brought them together on this frigid night? Little did Emily know the answers to those questions would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. The hospital buzzed with activity, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over the sterile corridors. Emily sat hunched in a plastic chair, her fingers wrapped tightly around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. She hadn't planned to stay this long. After all, she barely knew the man whose life she had just saved. But something kept her rooted to the spot. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was guilt, the nagging voice inside her head reminding her that leaving now would feel like abandoning him again. Hours passed, and the waiting room slowly emptied as other visitors headed home or back to their routines. Nurses bustled past, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor, while doctors exchanged clipped conversations about patients and procedures. Emily felt out of place, an ordinary girl in a world that seemed far removed from her own reality. Yet she stayed, staring blankly at the wall as her mind replayed the events of the evening. The image of the man lying unconscious in the snow haunted her, the way his body trembled, the faint rise and fall of his chest, the expensive coat that looked so out of place in that grimy alley. Who was he? And why had fate led her to him? Finally, a nurse approached her, breaking the monotony of her thoughts. "Miss Carter?" she asked gently. "The patient is awake now. He's asking to see you." Emily blinked, startled. "Me?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Why does he want to see me?" The nurse smiled kindly. "He says you saved his life. I think he wants to thank you." Hesitant but unable to refuse, Emily followed the nurse down a maze of hallways until they reached a private room. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, she could see the man sitting up in bed propped against a stack of pillows. His face was still pale, but some color had returned to his cheeks, and his dark hair was damp and tousled. He looked younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his early 30s, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of secrets. "Come in," he said softly when he noticed her standing there. His voice was hoarse but warm, carrying a tone of genuine gratitude. Emily stepped inside, feeling suddenly self-conscious. Her clothes were rumpled, her hair disheveled from the wind and snow, and she still hadn't retrieved her coat. Compared to the man before her, who exuded an air of quiet sophistication, even in a hospital gown, she felt painfully plain. I, she stammered, unsure of what to say. "I'm glad you're okay." The man offered a weak smile. Thank you, he said, his gaze locking onto hers. If not for you, I don't know where I'd be right now. It was nothing, Emily replied quickly, brushing off the compliment. Anyone would have done the same. No, he countered firmly. Not everyone would have stopped. Not everyone would have cared enough to help. There was a weight to his words, a sincerity that made Emily's heart ache. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft hum of the machines monitoring his vitals. Finally, the man broke the quiet. My name is Alexander Hartwell, he said, extending a hand toward her. Emily hesitated before shaking it, noting how cold his palm still felt despite the blankets piled around him. Emily Carter, she replied. Alexander nodded, studying her face as if committing every detail to memory. You must have questions, he said after a pause. Emily shrugged, trying to play it cool. Not really, I mean, you were in pretty bad shape when I found you. What happened? His expression darkened, and for a brief moment he looked away, his jaw tightening. I was mugged, he admitted reluctantly. They took my wallet, phone, everything. Left me in the alley like trash. Emily's stomach churned at the thought. That's awful, she murmured. Do you remember anything about them? He shook his head. It all happened so fast. 1 minute I was walking, lost in thought, and the next, his voice trailed off, the memory clearly painful. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as Alexander expressed his gratitude once more. He asked about her life, her job, and how she'd ended up in that particular alley on such a freezing night. Emily answered honestly, sharing bits and pieces of her story without revealing too much. Despite their vastly different worlds, she found herself relaxing in his presence. There was something disarmingly genuine about him, a vulnerability that made him seem less like a stranger and more like someone she could trust. Eventually, the nurses returned, urging Emily to leave so they could run additional tests on Alexander. Reluctantly, she stood, feeling a strange reluctance to part ways. Take care of yourself, she said awkwardly, fumbling for the right words. You too, Alexander replied, his smile soft but sincere. And Emily, thank you again. For everything. As she walked out of the hospital into the frigid night, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter wasn't over. Something about Alexander lingered in her mind, refusing to let go. Was it his gratitude? His mysterious demeanor? Or was it simply the fact that she'd saved a life tonight? A life that seemed far more extraordinary than she'd realized. Back home, Emily tried to distract herself with mundane tasks, making tea, tidying up her apartment, flipping through old sketches. But her thoughts kept drifting back to Alexander. She replayed their conversation in her head, analyzing every word, every glance. There was something unsettling about the way he carried himself, confident yet guarded, grateful yet distant. It was as if he wore a mask, hiding parts of himself from the world. Curiosity got the better of her. Pulling out her laptop, she typed his name into a search engine, Alexander Hartwell. At first, nothing unusual appeared, a LinkedIn profile, a few articles mentioning his name in passing. Then she stumbled upon a headline that made her gasp. Billionaire tech mogul Alexander Hartwell pledges $50 million to education reform. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she clicked on the article, the screen filled with images of a man who looked identical to the one she'd met earlier that night. Dressed in tailored suits, standing beside politicians and celebrities, Alexander Hartwell was no ordinary person. He was the founder and CEO of Hartwell Technologies, a global empire known for revolutionizing artificial intelligence and renewable energy. Forbes listed him among the wealthiest individuals in the world, and countless profiles praised his philanthropy and visionary leadership. Emily stared at the screen, her heart pounding. How could someone like him end up alone in a dirty alley, left for dead? Why hadn't anyone come looking for him? And most importantly, why did he seem so human? Overwhelmed, she closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Everything about Alexander defied logic. He was larger than life, a figure straight out of a magazine cover. Yet the man she'd met in the hospital was humble, almost fragile. She couldn't reconcile the two versions of him, the billionaire tycoon and the vulnerable stranger. Sleep eluded her that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the way he'd smiled at her, the raw emotion in his voice when he thanked her. She wondered what kind of life he led, surrounded by wealth and power but seemingly isolated in moments of crisis. Did people treat him differently because of his status? Did he have anyone he could truly rely on? By morning, Emily had made up her mind. Whatever connection she'd formed with Alexander, however fleeting it might be, mattered. She didn't care about his money or fame. She cared about the man who had looked at her with genuine gratitude and respect. If nothing else, she owed it to herself, and to him, to understand the full picture. Little did she know, their paths were destined to cross again. This time, though, the stakes would be higher, and the bond between them would grow stronger than either of them could have anticipated. The days following Emily's discovery about Alexander Hartwell were a whirlwind of emotions. She couldn't stop thinking about him. The man who had gone from being a mysterious stranger in an alley to one of the most powerful figures in the world. Her mind raced with questions. How did someone like him end up mugged and abandoned? Why had he trusted her enough to reveal his gratitude so openly? And how could she possibly reconcile the image of the humble, vulnerable man in the hospital bed with the larger-than-life billionaire she'd read about online? Emily tried to focus on her work, sketching designs for clients and brainstorming new ideas. But no matter how hard she concentrated, her thoughts kept drifting back to Alexander. She replayed their brief conversation in her head, analyzing every word, every glance. There was something magnetic about him, something that went beyond his wealth or status. It wasn't just his gratitude that intrigued her. It was the way he carried himself, the quiet sincerity in his voice, the way he seemed genuinely interested in her life despite their vastly different worlds. Then, 3 days after their encounter at the hospital, Emily's phone buzzed. The screen lit up with an unknown number. Hesitant but curious, she answered. "Hello? Emily?" came a familiar voice. It was Alexander. Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes, this is Emily. Is everything okay?" "I'm fine," he replied, his tone warm and steady. "I wanted to thank you again, for everything you did for me. I don't know how to express how much it meant." "It was nothing," Emily said quickly, brushing off the compliment as she always did. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Alexander countered firmly. "Not everyone would have stopped. Not everyone would have cared enough to help. You saved my life, Emily, and I want to repay you somehow." Emily felt a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. "You don't need to do that," she insisted. "Really, it's okay." But Alexander wouldn't let it go. "Please," he said, his voice softening. "Let me show my gratitude. At the very least, let me take you to dinner. It's the least I can do." Emily hesitated. Dinner with a billionaire? The idea seemed surreal, almost laughable. She imagined fancy restaurants, waiters in bow ties, and menus written in French. It wasn't her scene, not by a long shot. Yet there was something about Alexander's persistence that made her consider it. He didn't sound like a man throwing around his wealth to impress her. Instead, he sounded genuine, almost desperate to express his thanks. "All right," she said finally, surprising even herself. "If it means that much to you, then sure. Dinner sounds nice." Alexander's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Emily. I'll send a car for you tomorrow evening. Does 7 o'clock work?" "A car?" Emily echoed, her eyes widening. "Oh no, that's not necessary. I can meet you there." "Nonsense," Alexander said with a chuckle. "Consider it part of the experience. Trust me, you deserve it." Before Emily could protest further, he ended the call, leaving her staring at her phone in disbelief. What had she just agreed to? The next evening, Emily stood in front of her closet, staring blankly at her limited wardrobe. Most of her clothes were practical and comfortable, jeans, sweaters, and sneakers. nothing remotely suitable for a high-end restaurant. Panic began to set in as she realized she had nothing appropriate to wear. Just as she was about to call Alexander and cancel, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, a delivery man stood there holding a garment bag. Confused, Emily signed for the package and unzipped it cautiously. Inside was a stunning floor-length navy blue dress, paired with a delicate silver necklace and matching earrings. A note tucked into the pocket read, "For you. Wear it tonight. Alexander." Emily's jaw dropped. This was too much. Way too much. She felt a surge of guilt, knowing she couldn't accept such an extravagant gift. But then again, returning, it felt impossible. It had clearly been chosen with care, and rejecting it might come across as ungrateful. Reluctantly, she decided to wear it, vowing to return the favor somehow. When the car arrived, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows, Emily climbed inside feeling completely out of place. The driver greeted her politely and handed her a small bouquet of white roses. "From Mr. Hartwell," he said with a smile. By the time they reached the restaurant, Emily's nerves were frayed. The place was breathtaking, its grand entrance adorned with sparkling chandeliers and marble floors. As she stepped out of the car, she felt dozens of eyes on her, judging her every move. For a moment, she considered bolting back to her apartment, but then she saw Alexander waiting for her, near the door. He looked effortlessly elegant in a tailored suit, his dark hair neatly styled and his blue eyes twinkling with warmth. When he caught sight of her, his face lit up with admiration. "You look beautiful," he said sincerely, offering her his arm. Emily blushed, suddenly aware of how gracefully he carried himself. "Thank you," she murmured. "And thank you for the dress. It's incredible." Alexander smiled. "It suits you perfectly. Now shall we?" Inside, the restaurant was a masterpiece of luxury. Crystal glasses sparkled on pristine white tablecloths, and soft classical music played in the background. Their table was tucked away in a private corner, shielded from the bustling crowd. Emily marveled at the attention to detail. The flickering candles, the fresh flowers, the view of the city skyline through the massive windows. "This is amazing," she admitted as they sat down. "But honestly, you didn't have to go through all this trouble." "I wanted to," Alexander replied simply. "You saved my life, Emily. The least I can do is make sure you enjoy yourself tonight." Their conversation flowed easily, covering topics ranging from their favorite books to their dreams for the future. Emily discovered that beneath Alexander's polished exterior lay a deeply thoughtful individual. He spoke passionately about his company's mission to use technology for good, sharing stories of projects aimed at improving education and healthcare in underserved communities. "And what about you?" he asked after a while. "What are your dreams? What drives you?" Emily hesitated, surprised by the question. Most people never bothered to ask about her aspirations. "I guess I want to create things that matter," she said slowly. "Designs that inspire people or solve problems. Something meaningful, you know?" Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's admirable. You're talented, Emily. I can see it in your work. Have you ever thought about collaborating on a project together?" Her eyes widened. "With you?" "Why not?" he said, with a grin. "Your creativity combined with our resources could lead to something extraordinary. Think about it. I'd love to support your vision." Emily was speechless. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined sitting across from a billionaire discussing partnerships and creative opportunities. It felt surreal, almost too good to be true. As dessert arrived, a decadent chocolate souffle topped with gold leaf, Alexander leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Emily, I owe you more than I can ever repay, but if there's anything I can do to help you achieve your goals, please let me know. I mean it." Touched by his sincerity, Emily nodded. "Thank you, Alexander. That means a lot." By the end of the evening, Emily realized that Alexander wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was a kindred spirit, someone who valued kindness and purpose above all else. Despite their differences, they shared a common desire to make the world a better place. As they left the restaurant and stepped into the crisp night air, Emily felt a sense of hope she hadn't experienced in years. Whatever the future held, she knew one thing for certain: her life would never be the same again. The weeks following their dinner together marked the beginning of a new chapter in Emily's life. Alexander kept his promise to support her dreams, introducing her to opportunities she had only ever imagined. At first, Emily hesitated to accept his help, fearing that others might misinterpret her intentions. Wasn't there a fine line between gratitude and taking advantage of someone's generosity? But Alexander reassured her repeatedly, insisting that he wanted to invest in her talent, not out of obligation, but because he believed in her potential. Their collaboration began modestly. Alexander invited Emily to work on a design project for one of his foundation's initiatives, a campaign aimed at raising awareness about educational inequality. The task was simple: create visuals that could capture attention and inspire action. For Emily, it was a dream come true. She poured her heart into the project, spending countless hours sketching, revising, and refining her ideas. When the final designs were unveiled, they exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. Alexander was thrilled. "You've done an incredible job," he told her during a meeting at his office. His workspace was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city skyline. Despite its opulence, Emily noticed small touches that made it feel personal: family photos on his desk, books stacked neatly on shelves, and a potted plant sitting by the window. It reminded her that beneath his polished exterior, Alexander was still human. "This is just the start," he continued, leaning back in his chair. "I want you to lead more projects like this. You have a unique perspective, Emily. Something fresh and authentic. That's exactly what we need." Emily felt a mix of pride and disbelief. Leading projects for a billionaire's foundation? It sounded impossible. Yet here she was, being handed responsibilities she never thought she'd earn. Slowly but surely, she began working on larger campaigns, each one pushing her creativity to new heights. Her confidence grew with every success, and soon her name started appearing alongside Alexander's in press releases and interviews. But their relationship wasn't purely professional. Over time, they grew closer, sharing meals, attending events, and even spending quiet evenings discussing everything from art to philosophy. Emily marveled at how easy it was to talk to him. Despite his immense wealth and influence, Alexander remained humble and approachable. He listened intently when she spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and shared pieces of his own story: his struggles as a young entrepreneur, the pressure of running a global empire, and the loneliness that often came with success. For Emily, these moments of vulnerability deepened her respect for him. She realized that behind the headlines and magazine covers, Alexander was a man who carried heavy burdens. Fame and fortune hadn't shielded him from pain or isolation. If anything, they had amplified it. Yet in her presence he seemed lighter, freer, as if being around her reminded him of simpler times. As their bond strengthened, so did the scrutiny from those around them. Rumors began circulating about their relationship. Some accused Emily of using Alexander for his money, while others speculated that he was exploiting her for publicity. Colleagues whispered behind closed doors, journalists dug for dirt, and social media buzzed with speculation. Neither Emily nor Alexander paid much attention to the gossip, at least not outwardly. But privately, Emily couldn't help feeling uneasy. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings, Emily decided to confront Alexander about the rumors. They were sitting in his penthouse apartment sipping tea while rain lashed against the windows. The room was dimly lit, the atmosphere calm and intimate. "Do you ever think maybe we should keep our distance?" Emily asked hesitantly, staring into her cup. "People are starting to say things about us." Alexander set his tea down and turned to face her. "What kind of things?" "You know," she trailed off, unsure how to phrase it. "That I'm using you, or that you're using me. That this whole thing is some kind of PR stunt." Alexander sighed, his expression softening. Let them talk, he said firmly. Their opinions don't matter. What matters is what's real between us. But doesn't it bother you? Emily pressed. All the attention? The judgment? Of course it bothers me, he admitted. But not because of what they say. It bothers me because it takes away from what we're building together. You've shown me that kindness and authenticity still exist in this world, Emily. That's rare, and I won't let anyone tarnish that. His words struck a chord deep within her. For so long, Emily had lived cautiously, afraid of stepping outside her comfort zone or drawing attention to herself. But Alexander had taught her to embrace her talents, to believe in her worth, and to trust in the goodness of people, even when the world tried to convince her otherwise. Over the next few months, Emily threw herself into her work, determined to prove the doubters wrong. With Alexander's support, she launched her own design studio, hiring a small team of creatives who shared her vision. Together, they worked on projects that combined innovation with purpose, designing solutions for communities in need. From interactive apps that helped children learn to sustainable packaging designs that reduced waste, Emily's studio quickly gained recognition for its impact-driven approach. Meanwhile, Alexander continued expanding his philanthropic efforts, channeling his resources into initiatives that aligned with Emily's values. He credited her for inspiring him to focus on meaningful causes, often referring to her as his muse during interviews. Though the label made Emily cringe slightly, it felt too grandiose for her taste. She appreciated the sentiment behind it. Their partnership evolved into something deeper, rooted in mutual admiration and shared goals. Emily admired Alexander's determination to leave a positive legacy, while Alexander admired her ability to see beauty and possibility in even the smallest details. Together, they became a force to be reckoned with, proving that collaboration could transcend differences and create lasting change. Still, challenges arose. Balancing their professional and personal lives wasn't always easy. There were late nights spent brainstorming ideas, missed holidays due to conflicting schedules, and moments of doubt when the weight of their responsibilities felt overwhelming. But through it all, they leaned on each other, finding strength in their connection. One snowy evening, as they walked hand in hand through Central Park, Alexander stopped suddenly and turned to face Emily. Snowflakes clung to her hair and eyelashes, making her look ethereal in the glow of nearby lampposts. "I've been thinking," he said softly, his breath visible in the cold air, "about how much you've changed my life. Before I met you, I was lost in a way, buried under expectations and obligations. But you reminded me of what truly matters. You saved me, not just that night in the alley, but every day since." Emily's throat tightened, tears welling up in her eyes. "Alexander—" "No, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "You've given me purpose, Emily. A reason to keep going, to believe in something bigger than myself. And I want to spend the rest of my life doing the same for you." Before she could respond, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate diamond ring, its brilliance catching the light of the surrounding snow. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "will you marry me?" Time seemed to stand still. The distant hum of traffic faded, the crunch of snow beneath their feet grew silent, and the world narrowed to just the two of them. Emily stared at the ring, then at Alexander, her heart pounding wildly. "Yes," she whispered finally, her voice trembling with joy. "Yes, I'll marry you." Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking slightly as he did so. Then pulling her close, he kissed her, a kiss filled with promise, hope, and love. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Emily realized that fate had brought them together for a reason. Their journey, from a chance encounter in a snowy alley to a partnership built on trust and purpose, was proof that sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the simplest acts of kindness, and theirs was just beginning. The months leading up to Emily and Alexander's wedding were a whirlwind of excitement, planning, and reflection. For Emily, It felt surreal to go from being an ordinary graphic designer struggling to make ends meet to becoming the fiancé of one of the world's most influential men. Yet, despite the drastic change in her circumstances, she remained grounded, anchored by her values, her dreams, and the unwavering support of the man who had come to mean everything to her. Alexander, too, found himself transformed by their relationship. Known for his relentless drive and perfectionism, he had always prioritized work over personal connections. But Emily had taught him to slow down, to appreciate life's quieter moments, and to find joy in the simple things: a shared laugh, a quiet evening at home, or even the satisfaction of completing a creative project together. She reminded him that success wasn't just about wealth or power. It was about making a difference, leaving a legacy, and building meaningful relationships along the way. Their wedding day arrived on a crisp spring morning, the kind where the air smelled faintly of blooming flowers and sunlight danced across freshly trimmed lawns. The ceremony took place in a picturesque garden overlooking the Hudson River, with close friends, family, and colleagues gathered to celebrate their union. Emily wore a flowing ivory gown adorned with intricate lace patterns, while Alexander looked dashing in a classic black tuxedo. As they exchanged vows under a canopy of white roses, tears glistened in both their eyes. "I promise to stand by you through every challenge," Alexander said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "To honor your dreams as much as my own, and to never take for granted the gift of having you in my life." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with love. "I promise to remind you of what truly matters," she replied softly. "To be your partner, your confidant, and your biggest cheerleader. Together we'll create a life that inspires others." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted into applause. Friends and strangers alike marveled at how perfectly suited they were for each other, not because of their contrasting backgrounds, but because of the deep respect and understanding they shared. After the wedding, Emily and Alexander settled into a rhythm that balanced their professional ambitions with their desire for a fulfilling personal life. Emily continued running her design studio, expanding its reach to tackle global challenges like climate change and healthcare accessibility. Her team grew, attracting talented individuals who shared her passion for using creativity as a tool for good. Meanwhile, Alexander shifted some of his focus from profit-driven ventures to initiatives that aligned with Emily's vision, investing in startups and nonprofits dedicated to improving lives around the world. One of their proudest accomplishments came when they launched a joint foundation aimed at empowering underserved communities through education and innovation, named after Emily's late mother, a woman who had instilled in her the importance of perseverance and compassion. The foundation quickly gained traction, earning praise from leaders across industries. Through scholarships, mentorship programs, and community workshops, they provided opportunities for people to unlock their potential and build brighter futures. But their journey wasn't without challenges. Fame brought scrutiny, and not everyone approved of their partnership. Critics accused Alexander of exploiting Emily's talents for publicity, while others dismissed Emily as a gold digger seeking validation through association with a billionaire. At times, the negativity weighed heavily on them, threatening to overshadow their achievements. Yet instead of letting the criticism tear them apart, Emily and Alexander used it as fuel to strengthen their bond. They leaned on each other during difficult moments, reminding themselves of why they had chosen this path together. "We know the truth," Emily often told Alexander when doubts crept in, "and that's all that matters." Their resilience paid off. Over time, skeptics began to see the sincerity behind their efforts. Stories emerged of students whose lives had been transformed by their foundation, entrepreneurs who had received funding to turn their ideas into reality, and artists who had been given platforms to showcase their work. Slowly but surely, public perception shifted, and Emily and Alexander became symbols of hope, a reminder that collaboration could transcend boundaries and create lasting impact. Years passed, and their love only deepened. They welcomed 2 children into their lives, a daughter named Lily and a son named Jack. each bringing new layers of joy and purpose to their family. Emily cherished watching Alexander embrace fatherhood, teaching their kids the value of kindness, curiosity, and hard work. In turn, Alexander admired how naturally Emily balanced her roles as a mother, business owner, and advocate for change. Together, they created traditions that reflected their shared values. Every December, they hosted an annual holiday party for families in need, filling their home with laughter, music, and warmth. Summers were spent traveling to remote villages, volunteering alongside locals to build schools, plant gardens, and implement sustainable practices. And no matter how busy life got, they made time for weekly date nights, simple evenings spent cooking dinner together, stargazing on the rooftop, or reminiscing about their early days. Through it all, Emily never forgot the night she'd found Alexander shivering in the snow. It was a memory etched into her mind, a testament to how fate worked in mysterious ways. What had started as an act of kindness had blossomed into something far greater, a partnership built on trust, respect, and a shared commitment to making the world a better place. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Emily stood on the balcony of their penthouse apartment, gazing out at the glittering city below. Alexander joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked quietly. "All the time," Emily admitted with a smile. "If I hadn't taken that shortcut, we might have never met." Alexander finished, his tone thoughtful. "Funny how one decision can change everything." Emily nodded, leaning into him. "I'm glad I did." "So am I," Alexander whispered, kissing the top of her head. "Every single day." As they stood there, bathed in the golden glow of sunset, Emily realized that their story was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more dreams to chase, and more lives to touch. But whatever the future held, she knew one thing for certain. As long as they faced it together, anything was possible. And so, hand in hand, they stepped forward into the next chapter of their extraordinary journey. A testament to the power of love, resilience, and the belief that even the smallest acts of kindness can ripple outward, changing lives in ways no one could have imagined.